Water, a force of nature. Apocalyptic floods, events etched in the collective memory of humanity. The Great Flood. Is there any truth behind this?
The myth of the Great Flood could have been influenced by all sorts of natural phenomena.
Explanations echoing age-old fears.
The Earth burst, as can be read in countless records worldwide. The Earth burst.
The Bible offers hope for a life after the Great Flood. Noah's Ark. God instructs him to save all creatures, 2 of every kind.
If Noah existed, it's definitely possible we could find his ark.
Scientists want evidence of a wooden ark and a great flood. Is there any truth behind the myth of the Great Flood? The great myths of mankind. Mysteries passed on over thousands of years. Inexplicable events, places shrouded in legend, and superhuman heroes. Even scientists are fascinated. Is there any truth to these ancient legends? Researchers across the globe are working hard to solve the greatest mysteries of our time. Torrential rain, seas rising to dramatic levels. The Great Flood threatens all living beings. It's one of the oldest stories in the Bible. The danger posed by water is not imaginary. Storm surges, tsunamis, and extreme precipitation after drought periods wreak havoc. One of the reasons for these events is man-made, global warming.
This leads to severe droughts, extreme precipitation events, major heat waves. It also brings about extremely cold temperatures and heavy snowfalls. It seems counterintuitive, but these extreme weather events are becoming increasingly frequent.
The biblical Great Flood is portrayed as a consequence of human behavior too. God is furious with humanity and wants to drown the sinful world in a drenching rain. Only Noah and his family are to be saved. God tells them to build a large ship 3 stories high. He orders Noah to bring his family and at least 1 couple of every animal species. It rains for 40 days and 40 nights, until all mountains on the planet have been swallowed up by the flood. The earth remains covered with water for 150 days. Noah's Ark is the only one to defy the apocalypse. He, his family, and the animals survive on their wooden life raft. When the rain eventually stops and water recedes, Noah releases a dove. It returns with an olive branch, a sign of land. God promises Noah he will never ravage earth with a flood again, and sends a rainbow as a symbol of their covenant. Noah, his family, and the animals begin repopulating the planet.
At the time of the Great Floods, people must have interpreted them as punishment for some great wrongdoing, simply because of the sheer destruction and the ferocity of the floods. People put a story and myth upon the floods because they did not understand them and could not control them. Many myths come about because of our desire to control what is going on around us, so we endow things such as floods with magical powers.
Researchers believe the biblical story of the Great Flood was first documented in the 6th century BC. Did real catastrophes serve as inspiration to the authors? One lead brings us to the Black Sea. The region is believed to have witnessed what might have been the biggest flood in history. Professor Petko Dimitrov has been looking for evidence since the 1980s. His team takes sediment samples off the Bulgarian coast. They're hoping to find proof that the Black Sea used to be much smaller and surrounded by settlements that were flooded in a natural catastrophe. The scientists think they've discovered riverbeds and former coastlines in the sea sediment. Dimitrov gets in touch with a team of US geologists, Bill Ryan and Walter Pittman, who have something similar in mind. Their theory is that the Black Sea once was a freshwater lake. They believe that the end of the last ice age caused the sea levels to rise when all the glaciers melted. However, shortly thereafter, the water level in the Black Sea basin dropped again to about 60 meters below the Mediterranean sea level. This resulted in a cataclysmic flood. Water from the Mediterranean pushed into the Black Sea basin with a force 200 times that of the Niagara Falls. Bulgaria of today, the port of Varna. A team of the Black Sea Research Fund sets out from here to search for traces of this monster flood. The scientists are firm believers in Dimitrov, Ryan and Pittman's theory. They want to reconstruct the flooding of the Black Sea.
One of the great questions about the flood is when the flood happened. There are various of questions. The three main questions are where the flood happened, when the flood happened, how dramatic the flood was.
Konstantin Sterev believes that the Black Sea was once a freshwater lake below the Mediterranean sea level.
The world ocean level started rising and it rose probably 60 meters above the level of the Black Sea, and only the Bosporus was the barrier between the world ocean and the lake.
Konstantin Sterev and his team are hoping to find evidence of settlements along the shores of the Black Sea, dating back to a time before the flood. The water here is shallow, and new objects are often uncovered.
We're trying to find the villages, natural formation, which create possible habitats for the ancient people.
Did a flood destroy the settlements in this region? One thing's for sure, more than 7,500 years ago, the soil here was fertile. Archaeological finds have confirmed this. Petko Dimitrov's divers recovered sensational objects just decades ago. Dimitrov even refers to one of them as Noah's plate.
This plate was found near the coast of Varna in 1986 by our submarine at a depth of 93 meters. The plate was buried in the sand, and after we brought it out, we tried to determine its age. It turned out that the plate was carved from a sandstone.
But Noah's village hasn't been found yet. The researchers continue searching the bed of the Black Sea for settlement remains. Each and every rock tells a story.
We are looking for stones like this, which is very firm sandstone. That stone doesn't decay and doesn't erode quickly, so it creates natural habitats. And if you find large plates of this stone, sometimes under the water, this means that that could be ancient underwater village.
The researchers are hoping to find conclusive evidence of human civilization too. Suddenly, Konstantin Sterev spots something.
I think it could be, from what I see, sort of a remains from melting metal process. As you see, there are some cells here, and it's heavy, but not that heavy. So when you melt metal, you know, the slag, the material that remains, which is carbon. See, it's very dark. Could be carbon from the coal with a little bit of leftovers of the metal, but we'll see in a lot.
Every finding brings him and his team one step closer to the time before the Great Flood.
We're trying to figure out where the settlements are. Then, if we find accidentally an object, we give it to the archaeologists and we say, okay, we found that place. That's the place. That place looks like very, very suitable for a settlement. And we found this. So come here, just make a proper digging and discover the gold treasure of Atlantis or something.
The next morning in Varna, the researchers are looking for geological traces of a sudden flood caused by huge masses of water streaming in from the Mediterranean.
In our theory, the 60-meter deviation between the two levels was enough to make the flood really, really dramatic.
At the end of the last ice age, roughly 10,000 years ago, the sea levels rose. The levels of the Black Sea, however, lowered again. And that's when the Mediterranean Sea broke through the land bridge at today's Bosporus, according to certain theories. Konstantin Sterev and his team take soil samples from the different layers of sediment. Using a hoist crane, they lower the steel pipe into the water to extract the samples. They're convinced the sediment samples will prove this was once a freshwater lake. They dig deep, into the sediment and into the past. Natural catastrophes leave unambiguous traces in the rock layers of our planet. A flood the likes of the great biblical drenching would have destroyed the very foundation that all life forms needed to survive.
The myth of the Great Flood could have been influenced by all sorts of natural phenomena. Volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, earthquakes. It's all entirely plausible.
Did a disastrous flood strike the Black Sea? Is this the origin of the myth of the Great Flood? The Black Sea Research Fund team take a soil sample from the sediment layers and find what they were looking for.
This is all the freshwater sediment, which is light gray. And that part, which is very dark and full of organic matter, is after the flood, when all the living organisms in the ex-freshwater lake died and then just deposited on the bottom.
There's a clear line in the sediments separating pre-flood freshwater from post-flood saltwater layers. The researchers date this flood to about 5,600 BC. Could the Black Sea disaster have been the historical event that inspired the biblical Great Flood? The researchers extract samples from the mud. Microorganisms and fossils offer a glimpse into the past. The small samples are sent to the lab to determine the date of the sediments with more precision. But first insights could already be obtained. The transition from fresh to saltwater happened around the 6th millennium BC, a time when people were already building settlements along the Black Sea coast. The end of the Ice Age was their demise.
The objective of our research is to define the age and type of these sediments. We are looking at a time frame of somewhere within the last 25,000 years. This natural catastrophe, the flood, happens between the Pleistocene and the Holocene epochs. Our evidence seems to indicate that this event might have been what is commonly referred to as the Great Flood.
Before the flood, there were settlers here. Did the stories from the survivors help shape the myth of the Great Flood? In 1972, archaeologists came across a necropolis, a huge field of tombs near Varna. Their finds are sensational. They dig up the largest and oldest amount of handled gold in the world. This gold baffles scientists because it dates back to the 5th millennium BC. they didn't think there were any highly evolved cultures in the region at this time. Does this bear testimony to a civilization that survived the flood? What's the story behind the gold? It has found a new home in the Varna Archaeological Museum. The museum stores over 3,000 gold objects. Only a few people know more about these gold objects than Christos Smolenov. He's studied them for years and has gained impressive insights. Grave number 43, the grave of a high priest, a tribal chief, or even a king. It's loaded with grave treasures made of pure gold. The most remarkable aspect, however, is that the gold was processed with great craftsmanship.
Now look how important this is. How strange to find this gold cylinder fitting the inner circle of this biconic bracelet, which has been made in a fantastic way. You cannot see it being welded anywhere. Look, it's a fantastic object. Obviously, in this epoch that we are used to call prehistory, a great civilization had existed. And it was the mother civilization of all European cultures, and also of the great Sumerian culture, and of course of the greater Egyptian one.
To Smolenov, the measurements of the gold objects are a testament to this culture's superiority. Each piece was made with great precision, and Smolenov believes that this was more than just jewelry. He proves his theory with a 7,000-year-old gold plate. Smolenov has calculated that the diagonal to edge length ratio of the plate matches the proportions of the Great Pyramid, which was built 2,000 years later.
Some of my colleagues, who are pure archaeologists, would rather look at those gold artifacts as jewelry. I'm rather of the opinion that this gold plate is rather the first computer, or a kind of information carrier, which helps model significant proportions, because the thinking and the creativity of those primeval geniuses was based on understanding and usage of proportions.
Gold and knowledge about mathematical proportions. Christos Smolenov is convinced of one thing, that there was a civilization along the Black Sea, and it survived the flood. This culture may have served to influence later civilizations, and is still a testimony to the fact that highly developed knowledge existed before our time. People may have spread the flood myth around the whole world, and also in flourishing regions in Mesopotamia. It's likely that many places around the globe were flooded at the end of the Ice Age, but the stories from the Black Sea are particularly dramatic.
The myth of a great flood, I think, has survived for so long because it would have been such a traumatic experience for so many people. And that kind of experience gets burned in people's memories and passed down from generation to generation, almost as a warning of what might happen.
Mesopotamia, the land of the two rivers, between the Euphrates and Tigris, is a perfect place for large settlements. However, floods threaten this region every year. Do these real experiences line up with the mega catastrophe in the Black Sea region?
The theory championed for many years is that the flooding of Mesopotamia was linked to the great flooding of their rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris, and in Egypt to the annual deluge of the Nile. These floods were crucial because they gave people life, but at the same time, they would have been terrifying, and it's very possible that those floods were exaggerated.
In the 6th century BC, Babylon was a regional superpower, conquering Judea and forcing the intellectual upper-class Israelites into what's known as the Babylonian exile, where parts of the Old Testament were written. This way, Babylonian stories found their way into the Bible. Berlin, Museum of the Ancient Near East. Curator Juliana Euler watches over the treasures of the oldest civilizations of humanity. The famous Ishtar Gate once was part of the city walls of Babylon. Juliana Euler does research on flood reports older than the Bible. Cuneiform texts unearthed in the 19th century tell a remarkably similar story.
The authority of the Bible texts was put to the test when we found the same story with slight differences on cuneiform tablets, which were significantly older.
An earlier version of the Great Flood narrative can be found in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was written 1,000 years before the Bible. The epic tells of King Gilgamesh, who came across the Babylonian Noah, Utnapishtim. Just like Noah, Utnapishtim survived the flood because a god warned him and told him to save his family and all animals. There are thousands of age-old cuneiform tablets in the depot of this Berlin museum. Juliana Euler wants to take a closer look at one of them. Does it tell the story copied in the Bible 1,000 years later?
Some of those tablets referencing the Great Flood are actually right here in Berlin.
Before the tablet can be examined, a conservator has to check its stability.
Die sind alle mit Salz belastet und
there are salt deposits in all of these. If the climate isn't right, through efflorescence, these salts can break off small pieces.
kleine Stückchen absprengen.
The tablet is digitized using a 3D scanner. Afterwards, the tablet no longer needs to be taken from the depot for further examination. A great advantage. Engineer Fanet Gertlich calibrates the scanner. 2 cameras and a light source capture the object. Based on distortions of different size stripe patterns across the tablet, 3D image points are calculated. The result pops up on the screen, a digital model of a 3,000-year-old tablet. Where's the excerpt about the end of the flood? The dove is the key. Noah releases it in the Bible too.
Look, there it is. Do you see it? There's the dove. And there's the determiner for bird, a suffix, Muschen.
All flood stories show parallels, featuring similar elements time and again. The water recedes, land appears, and the dove brings an olive branch. Noah, his family, and the animals repopulate the earth. A strikingly similar tale was told in Babylon many centuries before the Bible was written. Myths pointing to primordial aquatic catastrophes can be found in many places around the planet. The creation story of the Australian Aborigines features a giant flood. It's preceded by an extreme drought which ends when a raging current splashes out of the mouth of a frog, flooding the whole world. In the mythology of India, the fish Matsya asks King Manu to build an ark and to save 7 wise men. The Icelandic saga collection Edda also tells of a global flood. Only the giant Bergelmir and his wife managed to survive in a hollow tree trunk. Do all these stories come from the same flood?
When you look at the horizon, things come to a point, and the same thing happens when you look back in history. And so when you look back, all the great floods kind of come together into a single notion of a gargantuan flood. So we're talking about the melting of the glaciers, the annual floods of the early cities, maybe even the flooding of the Black Sea, the loss of cities to the coastlines. All these floods can get mixed together on the horizon of time to become a great flood.
The parallels to the biblical Great Flood are striking. The myth of the Greek Deucalion could be based on a real-life event. According to tradition, Zeus, the father of the gods, decides to wipe out spoiled humanity. Titan Prometheus knows what Zeus is planning and tells his son Deucalion to build a ship. When the rain starts falling, Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha board the wooden chest. While all of Greece is flooded, only the righteous Deucalion and his wife survive the catastrophe. The story takes us back to reality, to Santorini, the volcanic island in the Aegean Sea. Volcano expert Evi Nomikou knows the Minoan eruption, which took place 3,600 years ago, was a catastrophe with devastating consequences. A volcanic eruption that hit the entire eastern Mediterranean region.
At the last phase of the Minoan eruption, we had huge pyroclastic flows that enter violently into the sea and generate a tsunami. So this tsunami destroyed the Minoan cities that they are located at the northern part of Crete, like Knossos. So we can definitely say that the Minoan civilization has started to decline due to the Minoan eruption.
Did the demise of the Minoans also fuel the biblical flood myth?
There probably is a core of truth to any stories about the Great Flood. Certainly there is evidence from geology and archaeology that great floods did affect different populations at different times. And certainly if you imagine that you're existing during that time and this enormous destructive force hit your village or your town, you would feel the need to explain it, to try and control it, and therefore would have built a story around it. So, as with all myths, there is a grain of truth to the Great Flood.
In Hollywood, the Great Flood is a source of endless inspiration. Catastrophes, destruction, doomsday, usually followed by a rescue scene carried out by virtuous heroes. The flood myth, the legend is alive. It also stirs the imagination of countless amateur scientists, like Dieter Bremer. He believes the Great Flood was a real and catastrophic event.
The Earth burst, as can be read in countless records worldwide. The Earth burst.
The former chemical engineer has a theory. The Earth used to be much smaller than it is today.
When the Earth fractured and solidified, it was covered completely by a granitic crust. The planet couldn't have been more than half its current size.
But then a celestial object hit the Earth, piercing through its outer layer.
I can't know for sure whether it was an asteroid or a comet, as some other sources suggest. But I do know that a celestial body crashed into the Earth with incredible force, breaking open its crust and allowing the enormous pressure on the inside to escape. The water that was previously in the Earth was pushed out and later fell back on the Earth as the water of the Great Flood.
Dieter Bremer wants to demonstrate his theory. In a first step, he boils water to 100 degrees Celsius. When he removes the pot from the stove, vapor continues to escape for a few seconds. As a second step, the water is heated to 120 degrees Celsius. A pressure cooker represents the Earth, covered by granite and under pressure. Inside the cooker, high pressure builds up and steam takes much longer to escape from the cooker than it would under normal pressure. Could high pressure have been the cause of the Great Flood?
According to the Bible, water poured from the skies for 40 days. And we see the reason here. There are huge amounts of water within all the Earth's layers, either dissolved in the magma or in the transition zone between the upper and the lower mantle. And if the lithosphere cracked open and the pressure dropped, the water shot up without any additional heat, like here, because it already was extremely hot. A steam pillar shot up to the sky where it turned into condensed water, which then fell back down towards Earth.
According to Bremer, the hot vaporous pillars shot into the air for days. The water released in this process caused the Great Flood. Later, the continents are said to have drifted apart and the oceans were formed. Bremer's theory contradicts all geological research findings, but it reflects the unfathomable aspects linked to the Great Flood myth to this day. The whole world is underwater. The only survivors are on the Ark. A complete reset for all terrestrial life. Is such a cataclysmic event physically possible to begin with? The answer is no. According to the Bible, the highest mountains were covered in water. This would require some 4.5 billion cubic kilometers of water, roughly 3 times the amount of water the world's oceans contain. So is it really just a myth? One thing is for sure, floods mark the real human experience. To this day, torrential rain, tsunamis, and tornadoes cause dramatic damage. Every year, horrific images make headlines. It's the biggest natural catastrophe of our time, the tsunami in Asia on Boxing Day 2004. The deadly waves rush away from the epicenter within hours. They're so powerful, they claim victims in places thousands of kilometers away. Around 230,000 lives are lost. Telegraph Hill in Potsdam is home to one of the oldest meteorological stations in Germany and to the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Dr. Fred Hattemann analyzes why floods are becoming ever more extreme. He and his team run computer simulations with weather data from the whole world to create mathematical models. Their verdict: global warming results in weather changes across the planet.
Global warming has been skyrocketing since the 1970s. Since then, the average global temperature has risen by about 1 degree Celsius compared to pre-industrial times. In Germany, for example, it has even increased by 1.5 to 1.6 degrees.
What's particularly alarming is the fact that the melting glaciers in Antarctica and Greenland could possibly result in flood catastrophes. Sea levels have risen by more than 20 centimeters in the last 100 years alone. And the pace is picking up. Climate scientist Hattemann and physicist Anders Levermann work on models to predict the frequency of extreme weather events.
The ocean is expanding because it's getting warmer. This first happens in the upper masses of water and eventually trickles down to the lower layers. Over time, the entire ocean expands. The melting ice masses covering Greenland and Antarctica are also raising the sea levels.
But it's not only coastal regions that are facing floods. Heavy rainfalls are getting increasingly frequent everywhere.
Heavy rainfalls are also linked to global warming. The warmer it gets, the more water vapor the atmosphere can hold, and this vapor is then discharged in heavy precipitation events.
The scientific community no longer doubts that humans have a decisive impact on global warming. More frequent floods are a direct result of this. The new Great Flood is man-made. Dutchman Johan Huybers meets this threat with humor and entrepreneurship. He's reconstructed Noah's Ark. His manual, the first book of Moses.
I decided to build Noah's Ark, adhering to the exact measurements we find in the Bible. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide and 30 cubits high. That's the result.
Zie hier het resultaat.
Huybers builds factories. He can draw on this experience.
I feel deep respect for him. We've been working on this boat for 3 years now. It took Noah 120 years, and he had to saw all his wood himself. We could simply go and buy it at a factory. It's much easier for us to build a ship.
Reconstructions of the Ark, like Huybers, serve as biblical theme parks, and they even go on tour. They've made it to the Netherlands, Germany, and England. There's also a wooden ark in Kentucky, USA. It was built by evangelist Christians who believe the story happened exactly as the Bible says. But what do we know about the Ark? In the Bible, God instructs Noah to build it. But can it float? The German Maritime Museum in Bremerhaven. Friedrich Theiss is an expert on ancient ships and wants to know how people envisioned Noah's Ark. Artists have always been fascinated by the Ark. The construction is one of the most popular motifs, especially among Christian artists. They often depict Noah receiving God's order. But what does the Bible say about the design plans?
The Bible says the ark, this wooden ship, was 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide and 30 cubits high. We can convert these measurements, of course, very carefully, to units we know today.
Friedrich Theiss and his team want to put the size of the Ark into perspective. The ships in the museum port look like toys compared to the proportions of the biblical craft. Theiss uses a camera drone to make his point.
All right, everyone, please step back so we can start.
The drone has to rise 100 meters into the air to show the surface the Ark would cover. "134 meters, that's what the scripture says. A comparison, the schooner in the port is only 44 meters long. And the most famous ships in the world, the Santa Maria, the flagship of Columbus, was 19 meters long. The Titanic was 269 meters, and the largest modern cruise ship is 361 meters long. Today, however, ships are made of steel, increasing stability and proportions. But Noah's Ark was made of wood. If we believe the Bible, the survival of all terrestrial life depended on its seaworthiness. The biblical flood lasted many months. When the water receded, the Ark ran ashore on the mountains of Ararat. Could it still be there?
We found wood older than the dinosaurs, and so if Noah existed, it's definitely possible we could find his ark. And just because we can see all kinds of metaphorical meaning in the story and in the ark, it doesn't necessarily mean that there wasn't a literal version or example in some place and some time.
With an elevation of 5,137 meters, Mount Ararat is the highest mountain in today's Turkey. Could its peak be the first spot of land re-emerging from the Great Flood? Did the Ark end up here? The mountain has been a mecca for those looking for the Ark for a long time. In the summer of 1955, one of them seems to hit the jackpot. Frenchman Ferdinand Navarro finds a piece of wood in an ice crevasse, a plank from Noah's ship. Navarro has his 15 minutes of fame before he's exposed. He brought the plank to the mountain himself.
This is classic fake news. Mount Ararat is a key part of the puzzle for those who are trying to find the original Ark. And to suddenly find an ancient piece of timber, well, that's all rather convenient. And as historians, we must be aware of this and must be a little bit skeptical and not take everything at face value.
In 1959, another discovery is made. In the midst of the Cold War, US pilot Gregor Schwinghammer is on a mission at the USSR border. As he flies over Mount Ararat, he spots an unusual object.
It appeared to be a barge-like structure, a large boxcar type design, and it appeared to be sticking out of a mountain in a kind of a horseshoe depression, and it definitely appeared to be man-made.
He's not the only pilot to see structures on the mountain reminding of ships. Could this be Noah's Ark? Has the wood been preserved over thousands of years? Geologists examine the objects and conclude they're all just rocks. No Ark, but rather the result of volcanic activities at Mount Ararat. Back in Bremerhaven, historian Frederik Thijs wants to find out if the biblical Ark model is potentially seaworthy. Naval architect Mustafa Abdel Maksoud has created a computer model that allows him and Frederik Thijs to see whether the box-shaped Ark could be able to withstand such high waves.
This shape will make sure the ship doesn't sink and is able to withstand comparable water pressure or wave loading for a certain amount of time.
They build a simplified model for the experiment in the workshop of the Maritime Museum on a scale of 1 to 100. They paint the model with varnish to keep the water out. According to the Bible, Noah sealed his ship with tar. In the water tank, the model will reveal if the details provided in the Old Testament are reliable. Professor Abdel Maksoud and his team use simulations that show the properties of ships at sea.
We can already see here that the damping is very, very small. I don't know where we are at with the wave period, maybe already in the natural roll period, and then we can see very strong roll motions happening here.
Ship construction doesn't revolve around floatability alone. Ships have to be able to defy the forces of nature at all times. Would an ark like Noah's have been able to withstand the waves of a great flood?
We can remove these parts and insert weights underneath.
Professor Abdel Maksoud examines the shape and structure. The weights simulate a realistic draft. The researchers position the model in the water. A ball in the basin creates waves of up to 60 centimeters, corresponding to roughly 60-meter high waves for an original-sized ark. A very rough sea. The wave basin is often used for maritime rescue trainings. The staff of oil platforms or offshore wind parks prepare for emergencies here, saving someone from a helicopter that crashed into the water or someone who went overboard at night. The test of the Ark model begins, and indeed, the box shape described in the Bible can float, even as the sea gets rough.
It has a very low center of gravity, so it hardly moves and basically doesn't roll at all. It just moves with the long waves and actually remains quite stable.
What remains unclear is how a much larger Ark could achieve the required level of stability. But the construction would be seaworthy.
What I find surprising is that a ship that's just drifting, with no propulsion and that is exposed to the waves at different angles, actually can handle the swell in the sea quite well.
Noah and his Ark. In the Bible, it manages to save all terrestrial creatures from the Great Flood. In modern words, it conserves biodiversity. Preserving nature's wealth. Nowadays, the message behind the myth of the Great Flood is more poignant than ever. The Research Museum Alexander Koenig in Bonn, Germany, is committed to the task of building one of the largest collections of animal specimens. What's more, the basement of the museum is also home to a biobank. This repository will allow future generations of scientists to examine species that have gone extinct. Jonas Astrin looks after an entire world of frozen specimens.
The
biobank is a collection of frozen samples which we use for molecular analysis. It contains DNA or tissue. These tubes sometimes also hold entire animals if they fit. Our focus is on preserving the samples in a way that allows us to conduct biodiversity studies with them.
From ichneumon wasps to elephants, the archive contains DNA samples from all kinds of species.
The interesting thing about the myth of Noah and his Ark is that it's also about preserving biodiversity, just like we do here. The needs of humanity are not the only priority. It's actually about conserving parts of nature that have to be preserved.
A bird of prey is to be added to the collection. Veterinarian Louisa Fisher takes a tissue sample to grow cell cultures and saves the genetic information for eternity. A 21st century version of Noah?
A biobank is of great use when it comes to protecting species, just like all our collections here. This bank is actually an incredible source of knowledge. It generates it. It's an infrastructure that enables knowledge to be generated on species that are or could be endangered. At the end of the day, we can only protect things we really understand.
Biologist Iodella Akintayo needs a sample at the cell lab. He wants to grow more cells using the tissue. This process takes days. The cells are placed in a nutrient-dense solution. Once in the incubator, they begin to divide. Iodella Akintayo shows us cells grown from an older sample. New life made in the lab. A part of the grown cells is taken to the DNA lab for further observation. Using molecular biological methods, DNA information can be retrieved from these cell cultures. This way, the genome of every creature can be researched by generations to come. At the Koenig Research Museum, the DNA sequences are entered into a database, and compared to existing data sets. This process allows scientists to identify the species to which a certain animal belongs. The bird in question was a common buzzard.
Basically, the key role for museum is to gather and conserve information about the diversity of life. So basically, it's like having a zoo in a museum.
And this is the zoo. Nitrogen at minus 190 degrees Celsius. Cell cultures from the common buzzard are frozen. Its genetic information will be preserved for eternity. By saving the animal kingdom from the Great Flood, Noah essentially becomes the first conservationist in history. He saves all life from death and destruction. A story from the Old Testament that can be interpreted as a mission, today more than ever.
The idea of a great flood is entirely plausible. The Earth has changed so much throughout history and continues to change so rapidly that the concept of a huge flood really is very believable.
The legend of the Great Flood teaches us that we will never be immune to natural catastrophes. While our ancestors feared God's rage, the biggest threat in modern times is global warming.